Hello everybody, hope you're doing well and thanks for joining us for another video. Now, the desperation of some people to try and dismiss the Artemis 2 mission as fake seems to have reached new highs, or lows depending on how you look at it. So today we're going to debunk some of them. For example, somebody recently posted this trying to argue that Artemis was fake because people shave. The notion being that after 10 days facial hair would grow, therefore because the astronauts didn't have facial hair, it must be fake. Obviously, the rate of hair growth varies from person to person, except, of course, shaving is a thing. NASA have even released a photo taken during the mission showing Jeremy Hansen having a shave. Now, I'm not sure if this person thinks that Artemis is the first time humans have been to space, but the idea of shaving in space isn't actually new. NASA's entire current space program is built on a foundation of gradual improvements in human endurance and learning the challenges and solutions involved with being in space. Even during their earliest space flights, they had their eyes set on going to the moon. The Mercury program was just figuring out really getting into space. The longest of all its missions was 22 orbits. It only lasted about a day and a half in space. But this was able to show that they could get humans into orbit and do a controlled re-entry to a targeted landing. But the Mercury program was never a long-term solution. It was a tiny one-man capsule and the rocket wasn't big enough to support any long-duration missions. Even before the first American ever went into space, NASA had already begun work on Apollo for going to the moon, and they'd also started work on Project Gemini to run during Apollo's development. Project Gemini was designed to push missions longer to see how humans coped with being in space for the duration of a mission to the moon and back, how to find, meet up and dock with another spacecraft, and how to do spacewalks. Even the Gemini program was a gradual progression. The first mission was 3 orbits lasting 4 hours, then 4 days, then 7 days. The longest of all the Gemini flights was Gemini 7 at just under 14 days in space. This actually surpassed all the Apollo missions for amount of time in space, and it was specifically done to figure out the challenges and solutions of keeping humans alive in space for that long. However, if you look at the crew before the launch versus when they're recovered after splashdown, you can see Lovell in particular goes from clean-shaven before the flight to a lot of facial hair after the mission. None of the following Gemini missions did more than 4 days in space, but then Apollo 7 was 11 days long, Apollo 8 was 6 days, Apollo 9 was 10 days, and in all, you see the crew had grown facial hair between the launch and the splashdown, some more than others. It wasn't until Apollo 10 that all the crew came home clean-shaven. Apollo 10 was in fact the first time humans had shaved in space, and all 3 even filmed themselves as they were doing it. Sure, it's more of a hassle without running water to rinse the blade, but then barbers for centuries have been given clean shaves with a blade and a towel. Then there's also mechanical shavers. By Apollo 14, NASA had found a company who developed a wind-up shaver. Again, they even captured video of themselves using this during the mission. And of course, people on the ISS are in space for far longer than the Artemis mission, and yet they can shave. And they don't use running water either. Presumably because they don't want their drinking water filled with shaving cream. Chris Hadfield has even done a video whilst on board the ISS explaining about their ability to shave.
So we use special astronaut shaving cream, Astro Edge. Squirts on very carefully, nice and blue.
So no, astronauts being clean-shaven is not a sign that Artemis was fake, it's a sign of an old problem that has long since been overcome. Next, we have this video.
Yeah, so I guess it's very hard to walk a straight line 7 days after returning from space. But here she is on stage just 2 days later, walking around like everything's fine. This is Christina Koch, or Cook, however you say it, directly after the landing, and she seems to be walking somewhat fine. Even though she has a little bit of assistance, she's still able to walk in a straight line.
So, from the ability to shave to the ability to walk. I've seen a few people bring this up, and basically they're saying Christina was walking fine immediately after the mission, then apparently forgot how to walk, and was then walking again fine 2 days later, therefore Artemis fake. Except what they overlook is that both immediately after splashdown and during the talk on stage, she's walking around at a normal pace with her eyes open. In this other video though, she has her eyes closed and is walking heel to toe. Now the human senses are incredibly complex and fine-tuned. We obviously walk around day to day perfectly fine, but even if you close your eyes or you put a blindfold on so you can't see, you can still walk okay because our inner ears are able to feed the information needed for our brain to work out our balance. Hence, blind people can still walk. But lose the function of those inner ear organs and suddenly your balance goes out the window. Hence, you feel a bit unsteady when you get an ear infection because it affects your vestibular system. Alcohol can also affect the flow of signals from your vestibular system to your brain, which is why if you're drunk and you close your eyes, it can feel like you're spinning even when you're not. Now, when in space, the reduced gravity affects your vestibular system and it prevents it from working properly. It doesn't stop astronauts from walking because they can still use their eyes to figure out their balance. But if you then force them to close your eyes, like Christina has here, that ability to balance becomes impaired. Christina herself actually posted this video on her social media accounts with a long description of exactly what was going on and highlighting that actually the reason she was doing it was to help study and learn how to treat people with neurovestibular conditions. The Artemis crew were in fact using this period of still being under the effects of microgravity to help NASA prepare for later missions when people will be working on the moon after long periods in microgravity.
We've also really our crew committed to a lot of the research for Artemis 3. So we've been in lunar lander simulations to see how our neurovestibular systems respond after 10 days in the Orion spacecraft. All of us have been in lunar EVA suits over in Building 9 in the reduced gravity simulator at 16G, doing really strenuous maximum heart rate testing in that lunar EVA suit.
Now, since we're on Reed Wiseman, somebody posted this clip of him prior to the flight of Artemis 2, which has blown up on social media, apparently with him pointing out humans never went to the moon in the 60s.
This is the first time we're going to send humans to the moon and we're going to have humans in low Earth orbit. That is awesome. Like, we should, as humanity, we should take a brief moment to go, that's awesome.
Except, of course, that isn't what Reed said. He didn't say, this is the first time we're going to send humans to the moon, full stop. He said this is the first time they'll send humans to the moon whilst there are humans in low Earth orbit. The first US space station was Skylab, but that wasn't put in orbit until after the end of the Apollo program. The first ever space station was the Soviet Salyut 1, which was launched in 1971, 3 months before the flight of Apollo 15, and it re-entered Earth's atmosphere in October 1971 after 175 days in space, 6 months before the next Apollo mission. And unlike, say, the International Space Station now, Salyut 1 was not permanently manned. It was only occupied for 24 of its 175 days in space. None of those 24 days coincided with the Apollo 15 mission, and in fact, there was no Soviet manned missions that coincided with any of the Apollo lunar missions. And the US weren't launching anybody into space at those times either. So when the Apollo missions to the moon were taking place, those astronauts were the only humans in space. Whereas during Artemis, not only were they in space whilst flying to and from the moon, but there was people on board the ISS at the same time. Hence,
this is the first time we're going to send humans to the moon and we're going to have humans in low Earth orbit. That is awesome. Like, we should, as humanity, we should take a brief moment to go, that's awesome. One of the things that we most asked for and look forward to is we are going to do a crew conference between Integrity and the International Space Station, the crew that's up there.
To do the types of things that get us ready to get back on the surface of the moon, and like the administrator was saying yesterday, onto Mars. And so we just appreciate you, and it's fun to be up in space with you at the same time.
that's like if I was to say that today is the first time I've eaten food whilst wearing a giant inflatable chicken costume. It does not mean it's the first time I've ever eaten food. And then there's another clip I saw circulating that people are using to claim as proof the moon landings didn't happen.
Let me begin by congratulating the team at NASA and our brave astronauts on the successful launch of Artemis 2. It was quite something. It will be traveling further than any manned rocket has ever flown and will very substantially pass the moon, go around it, and come back home from a distance that has never been done before. It's amazing.
Straw clutching much? Nowhere with that clip did Trump say people have never been to the moon. He said Artemis was flying further beyond the moon than anyone else has flown before. Apollo missions were flying with the aim of reaching lunar orbit, so aimed for a close flight around the backside of the moon, doing a burn to slow down and put themselves into a lunar orbit at an altitude above the moon of around 60 or 70 miles. The only one that didn't was Apollo 13, which had aborted its plan to land on the moon before they actually reached there. As such, they looped around the moon and back to Earth. Their closest distance to the moon was just over 150 miles, and their furthest distance from Earth was 248,655 miles, which stood as the record for the farthest that humans have travelled from Earth until Artemis 2. Artemis 2's flight profile was never intending on going to lunar orbit. They were basically doing a big loop beyond lunar distance and back to Earth, just in the right direction that the moon passed through their flight path as they did so. So they didn't get within 4,000 miles of the moon, and their distance from Earth peaked at 252,756 miles, so almost 4,000 miles farther from Earth than any Apollo mission managed. So again, going beyond what has previously been done is not the same as the previous thing never happening. It's like when Usain Bolt ran the 100 meters in 9.69 seconds at the 2008 Olympics to set a new world record. Then the following year he ran the 100 meters in 9.58 seconds to set another new record. That doesn't mean his previous world record time didn't happen. Next, I saw somebody questioning one of the photos of the moon.
Full-size image of the dark side of the moon. And everybody in the comments was hating in the scientific community. They're like, well, it's not the dark side of the moon. It's called the far side of the moon. And I'm like, okay, chill out. Just asking a question.
Want to see the moon's butt? There she is. This is the moon passing between the satellite that took these photos and the Earth. It's really bright because it's actually...
Now, here's my problem. This image of the moon does not match this satellite video of the moon. These craters are in the wrong places. It doesn't match. So who is being untruthful here? That's my question.
So, to answer his question, I don't think anybody's being untruthful, simply confused or unclear. Firstly, with regards to dark side versus far side. Dark side of the moon is commonly stated, probably thanks to Pink Floyd. However, the moon rotates once every 28 Earth days. So, just as with how Earth doesn't have a permanent dark side, neither does the moon. At any moment in time, half of it is illuminated by the sun, the other half is in darkness, but which parts of that go through a 28-day cycle? Think of it this way. We only ever see the same part of the moon because it's tidally locked to Earth. But during a total eclipse, that same part of the moon is pointing at the Earth, but the far side of it is looking straight at the sun. So at that moment in time, we are looking at the dark side of the moon. Now, with regards to the differences between the photos, remember the moon is spherical. It's three-dimensional. It's not a sheet of paper where you see this face on one side and then you flip it over to see the other side. We see roughly half the moon's surface from Earth, but the other half is obscured from view. Like how if I hold up my globe looking directly at the North Pole, we see pretty much everything in the Northern Hemisphere, but nothing of the Southern Hemisphere. That is much like us seeing the near side of the moon, but not the far side. If I rotate the globe 180 degrees, we now see all the Southern Hemisphere, but none of the Northern. That is what the Discover satellite taking this time-lapse was seeing. It's seeing the entirety of the far side of the moon, yet none of the near side that we're used to seeing. However, if I rotate my globe only 90 degrees, so we're looking at the equator, we can see some parts of both hemispheres, which essentially is what is happening in this image from Artemis. If I load up Google Earth and I switch it over to moon, This is the view of the moon that we're used to seeing. If I rotate the moon over 180 degrees, we see the same crater patterns that match the Discover satellite view. However, this darker area that we see here is actually part of what we see from Earth. Note the two areas that look like splash marks, the dark region, then a small gap, and then a large crater. All those match the Artemis photo, because the darker region is in fact the ocean of storms. If I pull Google Moon back up, we can see that's the region where Apollos 12 and 14 landed. If I rotate the moon a bit, we see Mare Orientale, which, as I've mentioned in a previous video, is the region in which Artemis were the first humans to view it in its entirety due to it being just out of sight from the Earth and the Apollo missions not flying high enough above the moon to see the whole thing. But I can rotate the moon around to just the right spot that perfectly matches the Artemis image. An image which is showing part of the near side of the moon, but also regions of the far side which are unable to be seen from Earth. Now for the final, and for me the most amusing of the arguments.
Oh, but it gets better, because this movie, Fly Me to the Moon, was released in 2024. What was this movie about? White House hires a team to fake the Apollo moon landing so they can win the space race no matter what. The icing and the cherry in this movie, it's called Project Artemis, allegedly. And look guys, I've debunked a lot of viral videos on people that have questions and think, oh, we faked going, and I've shut a lot of it down. But this one, I'm having a bit of a hard time with, because it's right in front of our face.
And to be clear, this is not one person saying this. I've seen this popping up all over social media. The 2024 film, Fly Me to the Moon, about a plan to fake the moon landings, is apparently proof it was all fake. Now, the premise of the movie is it's set during the space race, with NASA working on developing Apollo to get to the moon. But public support for spending that much money isn't great, so NASA hires Scarlett Johansson's character as a marketing specialist to help improve the public support for the program. Her character is then tasked with preparing fake moon landing footage that could be aired were something terrible to go wrong with the actual mission. A secret project which they codenamed Artemis. But in the end, the moon landings actually take place. So, people are saying that firstly, because the movie is about the idea of faking the moon landings, then therefore the moon landings are fake, and because they used the codename Artemis for faking it all, and the program now is called Artemis, therefore that's fake too. They seem to overlook that the movie is actually poking fun at the conspiracy.
We have to recast.
I think we should have gotten Kubrick.
The movie was released in 2024. The writing for the script began in 2021. The idea that NASA faked the moon landings has been around for decades. So it's not like the movie predated the conspiracy. The conspiracy was already well established. In fact, Rose Gilroy, who wrote the script, highlighted she'd read into some of the books on the conspiracy to see if people had come up with the detailed idea of how it was faked, but found nothing.
Did you watch any conspiracy videos to prepare to write that part?
I didn't watch so many videos, but I tried to kind of read a couple books because I thought, maybe someone has a figured out theory, and no one did, so we had to start from scratch, but it was endless fun.
And that's no surprise. I've been asking for years for somebody to show a detailed studio lighting setup that could accurately replicate the footage from all the missions, and yet I'm still waiting. Now, the underlying premise of Scarlett Johansson's character trying to make the Apollo program more popular, I don't think is untrue. Public support was very important to help NASA get the funding they needed to develop Apollo in the desired timeframe. Gilroy even referenced a book all about this publicity drive called Marketing the Moon. However, Gilroy also detailed how NASA helped a lot with the development of the movie, allowing the writers and the producers to visit NASA facilities that were used during Apollo to help get a better idea of what was involved.
When we were down at NASA, they had us up in the lab 700 feet up, and I think I had a blindfold on, so I wouldn't do well up there.
What was it like to do that?
The fact that NASA supported the film and brought us down for research, getting to see these buildings that you've been writing about for years was just a dream come true. It was so surreal, and I'm so grateful for everyone who supported it, honestly.
You'd have to be pretty damn stupid to pull off the greatest deception in the history of mankind, only to then go and help a Hollywood production company make a multi-million-dollar movie all about how you pulled off the greatest deception in the history of mankind. So the movie doesn't predate the conspiracy. The conspiracy predates the movie, and it just forms a part of the story of the movie. As for the inclusion of the name Artemis, again, the script writing began in 2021. NASA had announced in 2019, 2 years beforehand, that the program that was returning humans to the moon would be called Artemis. So again, the movie didn't predate the name Artemis, it simply drew reference to what NASA was already using. Sure, if the movie came out 20 years ago, detailing a plan to fake the moon landings, codenamed Project Artemis, and then 20 years later, NASA came out saying the program to return humans to the moon would be called Artemis, they might have a point. But ultimately, the movie is taking factual events from NASA and weaving in a pre-existing conspiracy idea. But even the person who wrote the script for the movie says NASA actually landed humans on the moon in the 60s. So, that's going to be it for this video. As always, feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video and you haven't already done so, then please do consider hitting the like and subscribe buttons, and hopefully we'll see you in the next video.